What really happened in an ancient Chinese battle? Spoiler: nobody was flying through bamboo forests. Forget crouching tiger. We're talking about terrified farmer holding sharp stick. No wire work, no perfect choreography, no honor duels, just 50,000 confused farmers trying not to die, while drums pounded and commanders yelled in dialects nobody understood. Picture this whole mess from Private Wang's perspective, some poor guy who got yanked from his rice farm 3 months ago and marched 930 miles in straw sandals that gave up the ghost around mile 300. His breakfast that morning was fermented fish and garlic, which sounds exotic until you realize that's just what doesn't rot on a 3-month death march. Now he's standing in formation with 49,999 other guys who smell exactly like fermented fish and bad decisions. Clutching a spear, he sort of learned how to hold last week, squinting at dust clouds that might be the enemy or might just be, dust. The drums start pounding out commands, which would be super helpful if anyone could actually hear them over the sound of their own panic and that guy hyperventilating 2 rows back. Your commander starts barking about executing the crane formation, except he's from way up north and speaks like he's gargling rocks, while you only understand southern dialect. So for all you know, he could be ordering lunch. Is this even the crane formation? Are you doing it right? Who knows, because those crossbow bolts just showed up, and they definitely aren't waiting for you to figure it out. This is what ancient Chinese warfare actually looked like when you strip away all the movie magic and historical romanticizing. Those famous battle drums everyone talks about? Yeah, the drummers had literally the cushiest job in the entire army because commanders figured out real quick that dead drummers can't coordinate anything. So they parked those guys way in the back, safe as houses, banging away while everybody else played a lethal game of telephone with their lives on the line. The art of war tells us to know our enemy, which is hilarious because most soldiers were having a hard enough time knowing which direction they were facing. See, ancient Chinese armies pulled recruits from dozens of provinces, each with their own special flavor of language that might as well have been Martian to guys from other regions. Your unit leader could be screaming absolutely vital information about not getting stabbed to death. But if he's from Shandong and you're a Guangdong farm boy, you're just hearing angry noise while sharp objects fly at your head. Trying to coordinate these armies was basically like organizing the world's deadliest flash mob where nobody speaks the same language and everyone brought farming equipment modified for murder. First contact happened fast and ugly, and nothing like the movies want you to believe. Chinese armies went absolutely nuts for crossbows because they'd figured out something Europeans took forever to realize. Any moron can learn to point and shoot in about a week. While European knights were spending decades mastering the longbow, Chinese generals were mass-producing mechanical death dispensers and handing them out to every farmer who could hold one without immediately shooting himself. The catch? Reload time was a real mother. You got 1 shot, 2 if you had the reflexes of a caffeinated cat, and then you were basically holding the world's most expensive stick while extremely motivated people with sharp objects rushed your position. Your elite bamboo armor looked pretty impressive when you were standing still in formation, all lacquered and shiny. But the second combat started, that stuff turned into nature's own torture device. Basically, an angry porcupine you wore on purpose. 1 solid whack and suddenly you're cosplaying as a human pincushion, except the pins are bamboo splinters and they're all pointing inward. The leather armor wasn't much better in southern China's soup-thick humidity, transforming you into a walking terrarium where sweat and misery grew in equal measure. Northern soldiers used to nice dry plains would start dropping from heat exhaustion before anyone even drew a weapon. Now about those weapons Hollywood loves to make look so graceful and deadly. The Dao, that curved saber that looks so cool when movie heroes are spinning it around. In real life, it was basically a heavy cleaver that got stuck in everything it hit. We're not talking elegant crane techniques here. We're talking about the fighting style of an exhausted butcher at the end of a double shift who just wants to go home. Most Dao wounds came from desperate hacking and the terror-fueled flailing, not from any kind of technique you'd call swordsmanship. The real MVP of Chinese battlefields was the spear, especially those ridiculous 18-foot pike-looking things they called long spears. Their whole purpose was beautifully simple. Keep the scary people with swords way, way over there where they can't reach your soft parts. Of course, using these telephone poles in formation was about as graceful as you'd expect when you cram thousands of terrified farmers together and tell them to coordinate. Chinese military manuals show these gorgeous geometric spear formations that probably worked great on a parade ground, on an actual battlefield where people are screaming and dying and nobody can hear orders. You're more likely to skewer your buddy than the enemy, and that's if you remember which end has the pointy bit. Then you've got the G halberd, which is what happens when weapon designers can't make up their minds and decide to combine stabbing, slashing, and hooking into one overcomplicated mess. Ancient Chinese efficiency at its finest, if efficiency means giving a complex weapon to someone who learned which end to hold yesterday. Hand a G halberd to a conscripted farmer, and you'll get a spectacular demonstration of how many ways one man can accidentally injure himself and everyone within swinging distance. But we need to give crossbows their due, because China turned these things into the ancient equivalent of an assembly line product. Brilliant concept, really. Minimal training needed, decent range, absolutely terrifying when 1,000 of them went off at once. The downside that nobody mentions in the war poems? After you launched your bolt, that reload time stretched out like a bad dream when some dude with murder in his eyes and a sword in his hand was bearing down on you at a full sprint. Congratulations on your one contribution to the battle. Now you're holding a very expensive club that doesn't even make a good club. Here's the thing that really gets me. Most of these weapons weren't even proper weapons at all. Remember that 60% conscription rate from desperate farmers? They brought what they had, which meant agricultural tools creatively repurposed for violence. That terrifying warrior charging at you might actually be Zhang from 2 provinces over, wielding a farming hoe he sharpened last week because that's literally all he had. Kitchen knives lashed to bamboo poles, threshing flails suddenly finding new careers in skull threshing. Basically anything that could cause damage if you swung it hard enough. One Han Dynasty general wrote home complaining that his army looked less like soldiers and more like the world's angriest farmers market. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Armor tells a completely different story than what Hollywood wants to sell you. Forget those gorgeous metal suits that sparkle in the sun, because 90% of soldiers were wearing leather and cloth held together by hope and hemp rope. Metal was expensive, skilled smiths were rare, and more importantly, China is hot. Stupidly, humid, soul-crushingly hot. Marching through rice paddies in full metal armor during summer campaign season wasn't protection. It was a creative form of suicide where you cooked yourself before the enemy got a chance. Lamellar armor? Those overlapping metal plates that look so badass in museums? Sure, they looked fantastic when you were posing for the recruiting scrolls. In actual use, you were basically strapping 30 pounds of personal oven to your body in heat that would make Satan consider air conditioning. The plates trapped every drop of moisture against your body, rust spreading faster than camp rumors about what's really in the rice wine. After fording a river, which happened constantly in Chinese warfare, your armor stopped protecting you and started actively trying to drown you with every step. Bamboo armor represented China's budget option for people too poor for leather but too smart to fight naked. Light, cheap, grows everywhere. What's not to love? Well, everything once combat started, because bamboo armor was essentially nature's way of saying, I tried my best before exploding into 1,000 splinters, all aimed at your vital organs. One decent hit, and your protective gear transformed into an inside-out hedgehog situation. Veterans learned to wear thick cloth padding underneath, not for extra protection, but to keep the inevitable bamboo shrapnel from turning their torsos into geography lessons written in scar tissue. The real enemy wasn't the other army's weapons, but the brutal combination of exhaustion and heat that dropped more soldiers than any blade. Chinese campaigning season peaked in summer because that's when roads weren't mud soup and rivers were crossable, which meant fighting in humidity that would make a fish complain about moisture. Your leather armor became a personal swamp ecosystem. Metal helmets transformed into skull-mounted easy-bake ovens, and cloth padding achieved the impressive feat of being both soaking wet and on fire simultaneously. Speaking of helmets, let's appreciate the spectacular stupidity of trying to fight while wearing what amounted to a metal bucket with tiny eye slits. Visibility through those face guards was like trying to navigate life looking through a mail slot while someone shook you. Peripheral vision became a forgotten luxury, which explains why Chinese battles devolved into chaotic mob scenes so fast. Nobody could see what the hell was happening more than 3 feet in front of them. Weight distribution turned every soldier into a wobbling disaster waiting to happen. Ancient Chinese armies didn't have modern military engineering or ergonomic anything, so your gear hung off your body at whatever angle gravity and bad luck decided. Armor pulled you backward, weapons dragged you forward, supply packs yanked you sideways, and somewhere in that mess, you were supposed to maintain formation and fight. Ancient Chinese soldiers invented functional fitness out of pure necessity, except they called it trying not to fall on your face and embarrass yourself to death. Now we get to the part that really messed with people's heads, because Chinese warfare wasn't just physically brutal, it was designed to break your brain. The confusion started immediately with multi-dialect armies trying to coordinate through what amounted to the ancient version of a bad game of telephone. Your sergeant screams something that sounds urgent, but is he ordering a charge or complaining about his hemorrhoids? By the time someone who speaks his dialect translates, the enemy has already introduced their spears to your front rank's internal organs. Banner systems supposedly helped units identify each other, which worked great in theory and absolutely nowhere else. The moment real combat started, dust clouds, rain, blood, and good old-fashioned chaos turned every banner into an indistinguishable brown blur. Everyone wore basically the same undyed hemp clothing that started beige and ended up whatever color mud and terror come in. Friend or foe recognition became a lethal guessing game where guessing wrong meant catching a friendly spear to the kidney. The universal solution? Scream louder than everyone else and swing at anything that looked even vaguely threatening, which in those conditions was literally everyone, including your own shadow. Sensory overload hit like a physical force once battle joined. Thousands of drums, gongs, bells, and war cries created this wall of sound that shut down higher brain function faster than a philosophy final. Your mind couldn't process individual sounds anymore, so it just gave up and played hold music while your body ran on pure adrenaline and muscle memory from that 1 week of training. Chinese armies tried using different drum patterns for different maneuvers, which would have been brilliant if anyone could distinguish drum pattern number 3 from drum pattern number 17 when both were being played by terrified musicians in the middle of a murder festival. Psychological warfare took weird forms in ancient China, like massive screaming contests where entire armies hurled insults at each other. Standard practice, except nobody could hear actual words over 50,000 other people also screaming. So it devolved into competitive noisemaking where volume beat vocabulary every time. Imagine the world's angriest karaoke night where everyone's singing different songs simultaneously and the prize for losing is death. Real statistics paint a picture Hollywood would never touch because it's too depressing for entertainment. Average time before a formation completely fell apart, 15 minutes. Not 15 minutes of heroic last stands and brave charges, but 15 minutes of confused stumbling and increasing panic before somebody figured out that running away was an option and started the world's deadliest domino effect. Percentage of soldiers who could actually see their commanding officer during battle, less than 5%, and that's being generous. Soldiers who understood the actual battle plan beyond don't die, also hovering around 5%. Mostly officers who were too important to be anywhere near the actual fighting. Chinese battlefield medicine deserves its own special circle of hell in the Museum of Human Suffering. Arrow wounds were everywhere thanks to China's crossbow fetish, and treating them involved choices that ranged from bad to catastrophic. Pull the arrow out? Congratulations. You've just installed a drainage system for all the blood your body was using. Leave it in? Enjoy the infection party as that filthy arrowhead turns your insides into a bacteria rave. Surgeons, and I'm using that term so loosely it might fall off, basically had two categories for patients: might live if lucky and would make excellent teaching cadaver. Blunt force trauma from maces and war clubs created a whole different flavor of medical nightmare. Your armor might stop penetration, but your organs didn't get the memo about being impact resistant. Internal bleeding was essentially untreatable, unless you count poking the swelling and prescribing herbs that did absolutely nothing as treatment. The medical texts of the time are full of careful descriptions of symptoms, followed by treatments that amount to thoughts and prayers with extra steps. Infection rates in Chinese battlefields reached absolutely spectacular heights thanks to the combination of humidity, heat, and hygiene standards that would make a medieval European peasant concerned. Survive the battle? Here's gangrene as your lovely parting gift. Wound care involved packing injuries with paste made from whatever the medic had handy, usually some combination of medicinal herbs and whatever dirt was within arm's reach. The herbs might have actually helped if they weren't mixed with soil, containing every pathogen in southern China, plus a few that were just visiting. Traditional Chinese medicine had beautiful, complex theories about energy flow and balance. Battlefield Chinese medicine had desperate men shoving mud into wounds and hoping the screaming would stop. Acupuncture for arrow wounds worked about as well as you'd expect, which is to say it didn't, but at least it gave medics something to do besides watch people die. Cauterization with heated bronze was considered premium treatment, which tells you everything about medical standards when the cure that's worse than the wound is your best option. Herbal poultices reached creative heights of uselessness as military doctors threw everything at wounds to see what stuck. Ground beetles, tree bark, mysterious powders that might have been medicine or might have been dirt, all mixed into pastes that smelled like death and probably accelerated it. One surviving recipe called for human hair mixed with honey and wine, which did absolutely nothing medical but made patients feel better about their treatment, including exotic ingredients, even if those ingredients were just beard trimmings from the guy in the next cot. Now for the really fun part, watching how those famous Chinese military tactics everyone quotes actually played out when you gave them to exhausted, terrified conscripts. Sun Tzu wrote brilliant strategies that assumed literate, trained, motivated commanders working with professional soldiers. Reality gave you illiterate officers trying to remember which formation was which while leading farmers who couldn't coordinate a barn raising, much less a complex military maneuver. Deception and misdirection sound great in the war colleges until you realize your army is accidentally deceiving itself through pure incompetence and nobody needs to help. Chinese generals loved their complex formations named after animals and mythical beasts, all laid out in beautiful detail in military manuals that looked great on paper. The crane formation, the tiger formation, the dragon formation, each with specific movements and purposes that absolutely fell apart the second real humans tried to execute them under combat stress. Is this the crane formation, or are we just lost? Became the most common battlefield philosophy question, usually asked while running in whatever direction seemed to have fewer sharp objects. Cavalry charges in rice paddies revealed the spectacular gap between northern military theory and southern Chinese geography. Turns out horses aren't great swimmers, which anybody who'd ever seen a rice field could have mentioned, but apparently nobody asked the locals. Watching proud cavalry units disappear into muddy water became such a common sight that southern armies started counting on it as a defensive strategy. China's insanely diverse terrain created unique flavors of military disaster. River crossings turned disciplined armies into desperate mobs fighting for boat space, while officers screamed about maintaining unit cohesion. The Yellow River earned its reputation as the army killer by claiming more soldiers than actual combat, because drowning in muddy water while wearing armor is exactly as impossible to survive as it sounds. Mountain battles added the exciting element of gravity to the usual chaos, because why should death come from only one direction? Chinese military history is full of armies that mastered the art of dying from falling off things. Forget clever enemy tactics when the mountain itself was actively trying to kill you through the innovative method of being a mountain. Narrow paths meant single-file movement, which sounds organized until you realize it made you a perfectly lined-up buffet for anyone with rocks and a height advantage. Rice field combat deserves its own special hatred from anyone who survived it. Fighting in a rice paddy was like trying to have a knife fight in a swimming pool filled with pudding, except the pudding is mud. The pool has hidden ditches, and everyone's still trying to kill you. Every step risked planting your foot in an irrigation channel and twisting something important. Your carefully maintained formation disintegrated faster than wet paper as men stumbled through knee-deep muck while trying to remember which end of the spear goes toward the enemy. The mud grabbed weapons, sucked off shoes, and turned tactical retreats into slapstick comedy routines where grown men literally couldn't run away fast enough to save their own lives. This brings us to ancient China's most popular battlefield maneuver, the tactical advance to the rear, also known as running like hell. Despite what court poets wrote later, the mandate of heaven meant exactly nothing when some farmer with a grudge and a sharp stick was trying to introduce it to your intestines. Survival instincts beat philosophical concepts 10 times out of 10. Officers on horses loved to write dispatches about cowardly infantry fleeing from battle, conveniently leaving out the part where they had horses and could leave whenever things got spicy. Infantry soldiers knew this and developed a healthy resentment for mounted commanders who could critique their courage while maintaining easy access to the exit. The class divide between riders and walkers created predictable results. Officers died last, complained most, and wrote the histories that blamed everything on peasant cowardice. Playing dead among actual corpses became such a standard survival technique that armies started checking bodies with spears just to make sure. Ancient Chinese battlefield hide-and-seek, except losing meant actual death. The trick was timing your miraculous resurrection for that sweet spot after the enemy stopped stabbing corpses, but before the burial details started their work. Too early, and you got perforated for real. Too late, and you woke up under a pile of your former comrades wondering if maybe you should have just fought after all. Victory conditions in ancient Chinese warfare were refreshingly honest about human priorities. Still breathing at sunset? That's a win. Got most of your original limbs? Huge victory. Remember your own name and which province you're from. You're basically a war hero. The bar for success was so low it was underground, and men still struggled to clear it with any dignity intact. Post-battle reality looked nothing like the triumphant scenes in paintings. It was looting time, and dead men had stuff that lived men needed. Those heroic last stands created excellent shopping opportunities for survivors who needed better sandals, sharper weapons, or just pants without mysterious stains. Battlefield recycling at its most practical, where honor took a back seat to the fact that your shoes disintegrated 300 miles ago and that corpse over there looks about your size. Victory celebrations consisted of finding whatever alcohol hadn't been destroyed and trying to forget everything that just happened. Triumphant return home translated to limping back to whatever was left of your farm, hoping both armies hadn't burned it out of spite, convenience, or boredom. Heroes returning from glorious battle looked suspiciously like starving men in stolen clothes who flinched at loud noises and couldn't stop checking over their shoulders. Ancient Chinese soldiers weren't the martial arts masters that movies want you to believe. They were farmers, craftsmen, and merchants yanked from their lives and thrown into incomprehensible violence with minimal training and equipment held together by rust and prayer. They fought not for honor or glory or any of that poetry nonsense, but because the alternative was execution for desertion, and at least in battle, you had a chance, however slim. These men died not in choreographed duels with profound last words, but from disease, accidents, friendly fire, and the thousand other inglorious ways war kills people. They deserve to be remembered not for impossible acrobatics that never happened, but for facing impossible situations with whatever courage they could find between bouts of dysentery and existential terror. The next time you watch a kung fu epic, remember that real ancient Chinese soldiers fought more like confused farmers than flying warriors, because that's exactly what most of them were. History's actual warriors were regular people who just wanted to go home, see their families, and never hold a spear again. Somewhere in a Chinese field, a broken bronze helmet sits in the mud, not the elegant prop from a movie, but the dented, rusty reality of what happens when 50,000 terrified men try to survive something they never trained for and barely understood. That helmet is a monument to the truth we don't like to remember: that war is mud and terror and confusion, and the only heroes are the ones who somehow made it home.